Okay, so just a review of what we've been talking about, the scientific method. There's certain steps that scientists must take in order to find out answers to questions they have about the natural world. Doesn't have to be scientists. Anybody can conduct an experiment and find out an answer. But in order for our results to be valid, we have to conduct it in a certain way, and we call that the scientific process or the scientific method. Okay, so we first make an observation, and we notice something happening in the real world that we want to know a little bit more about. So we observe something happening or something that has happened, and we think of a question that we want to answer. Now, when you're doing science, you have to make sure that your question is testable. And what I mean by testable question is that it's something that you can answer by doing an experiment. For example, if you ask a question like, do mussels prefer to live in warm water or cold water? You can't answer that using science, because you can't find out a mussel's preference or if they're going to be happier. What you have to do is frame your question like, will mussels live longer in this environment or that environment, or will mussels reproduce more in this environment or that environment? So it has to be something that you can test. The next thing you do is you formulate a hypothesis. You say, well, what do you think the answer to the testable question is? And this is good science when you develop a hypothesis, because when you develop a hypothesis, you have to have a little bit of knowledge about the situation. So hypothesis is an educated guess about what you believe will be the result. Okay, the next thing that you do is you conduct an experiment or an investigation. And an experiment is one where you manipulate the variables, and an investigation is where you observe things that are happening naturally. You're not manipulating anything when you do an investigation. Okay, the next thing that you do is you collect data, and data can be either continuous or discrete data. The continuous data that you might collect would be a measurement of something like time or length or speed, and the discrete data that you might collect are how many of something. You're counting quantity. So data is definitely something that you need. You need data in order to decide, well, what happened when I did this experiment. And data is numerical proof that something happened. And when you collect the data, you're going to have to analyze it. You're going to have to look at it and say, well, what do these numbers tell me? Do these numbers tell me anything about what I asked? And one of the things I want you to think about is the case study that we did with the dwarf mussels. The students collected data and they analyzed it, and in class we talked about a container of mussels with no phosphates and a container of mussels with phosphates. Okay, so this one here was the control group with no phosphate, and this group was the test group with phosphate. And the data that we collected was the number of mussels that were that had died. And in this one we said that 596 out of 10,000 died, and in this one we said 1,800 out of 10,000 died, and that K means thousand. And so we looked at it and we determined that 1,200 mussels actually would have died in the tank with the phosphate, and that's a pretty significant number. And the reason we say 1,200 is because we see here that 596 or close to 600 die because of natural causes in the regular tank, and 1800, take away 600 would be about 1200. We could also look a little bit further into that and say, well, is it reasonable that 596 mussels would die? So you have to know that science is fluid, it continually changes, and investigations generally don't stop. They generally lead to more investigations, okay? So you analyze the data and find out what it tells you. And then the last thing that you need to do is make an inference using your data. So you infer and draw a conclusion. And you can conclude something from your experiment. Typically what you conclude is the answer to the testable question. Now, sometimes conclusions can be incorrect. The interpretation of the data might be flawed. You might not interpret your data correctly. But you also have to understand that there are other things that might have contributed to your results.